All right, welcome to All Points TV. This is not a regular show. You are here at a special show that we're putting on for you today. My name is Eric Gunnels, and this is Drew Shapiro. Drew Shapiro is the county commissioner of the
6th District in Southern Genesee County.
Thank you. And I am a Thetford Township trustee of Thetford Township. And we are here today, both of us are candidates for the Republican House seats of the state of Michigan. Drew is running in the 51st District of Genesee County. I am running in the 48th District of Genesee County. Drew is running as a Republican. I am running as a Democrat. For our viewing audience, we are not opponents. We will more than likely be colleagues in Lansing, working for all of you. So with that, we're going to get started here in a good discussion. I think it's going to be a really great discussion. Drew and I have known each other since the days of the BNI. Drew, you want to give a little background to that?
Yeah, Eric and I met at a business networking group. I operate a financial planning practice, and Eric and his family business were represented at Business Networking International, a group up in Clio as well. And we learned that, hey, we have quite a few things in common. I was on the Fenton School Board at the time. I believe, Eric, you were still a trustee
yep.
in Thetford, and I think we have a lot of things in common, and I'm happy to be here today. I think the way politics are in the world right now, it's important to show people that we're able to work together, and with how divisive things have become, I don't think that benefits the voters and the constituents. I think we need to be able to work together, and as I've mentioned to you before, I think argument is good, but fighting is bad, and
right.
We should be able to hash these things out and compromise and work on behalf of the people we represent.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into a couple of we're going to get into our accomplishments in our own elected office positions. But first, let's go into why did you want to become an elected official in the first place? And just for the audience, just to kind of have an understanding of our age. Drew, you're 29.
Correct.
And I'm 38. And I think that we are both young at heart. And we have we're really in a younger age bracket, but at the same time we have life experience.
Right. The energy to get the job done and the experience to know how to do it right.
Exactly. There you go.
I think that's a Just for Men commercial.
That's a good one though. That's a good one.
Absolutely.
Matches up with politics. Great. So tell me tell us why you got into politics.
So I went to Central Michigan University to study finance. I knew that's what I wanted to go into, and started my own practice while I was in Stoughton College at the age of 18. At that time, I really knew that I'd want to get involved in at least local politics sometime in the future. Ended up majoring in political science, and what really got me involved in politics, when I was 22, I ran for the school board. And I did that because I felt our education system was failing my peers. We were always told, go to school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades. There's going to be all these great jobs out there. The world's going to be banging your door down, offering you these great careers with benefits. And that was right around the Great Recession and the time that started, and that's not how the world worked out. And I saw so many of my peers be unable to translate their academic success into real world success. And I said, I've always been unable to sit on the bench. If something's wrong and I think something needs to be fixed, I feel the need to take action. And that's why I ran for the school board at the time and served 4 years there, 2 as president, and then went on to the county commission. And I've really developed a passion for transparent government. I think our local officials and elected officials need to be accessible to the people we represent, and stand up to the establishment and the special interest groups that may not always have our best interests at heart.
Right on. You mentioned the establishment. I'll do a quick rundown of why I got into politics, and then we'll jump into the establishment discussion. Well, I first got into politics in 2012. I ran for my trustee position. The reason I got into that was because at the age of 25, or 24 actually, I built my own home. I was in the field of construction, heavy equipment operator, concrete finisher my whole life. And at the age of 24, I built my own home with my own 2 hands, which not everyone can do. And it was a beautiful home. And I had a mortgage just like anybody else. But during the 2007, 2008 economic downturn of the economy, that I took a hard hit, and I was hit very hard, like a lot of people were, yeah. And especially in the field of construction. And when that happened, I lost my home, and I put so much energy and so much love and so much work into my own home, so that I could enter that project many thousands of dollars less than the average consumer because I put my own sweat and hard work into it. When I lost that to the banks, which the American people gave $700 billion to bail them out, and not a penny of that money went to help people like me, and that was a tragic tragic event of my life, which then changed my perspective of a lot of things, and I realized that I wasn't viewing politics like I should have been, or paying attention anyway. So that got me more interested. And then from there, in 2008, Michigan changed the law. The 2008 Michigan medical marijuana law passed, and I had people and family in I had family and friends that were sick. I became a caregiver, one of the first licensed caregivers in the state of Michigan. And I was politically and actively involved for the last 9 years in the medical marijuana community, doing all sorts of radio activism across the state, going to Lansing, going to Senate Judiciary Committee hearings, and doing a lot of really proactive things to really change and to help our society change in this transition, because there was a change when we went from illegal marijuana to recognizing that marijuana is a medicine and that it belongs in the hands of people, and we should respect people who take care of patients and provide for them. That aside, I ran for 2012 to my trustee position, put medical marijuana on the top of my running platform. In 2000, many people said that was a political suicide or a fluke, but in 2016 I was reelected by a 24% higher margin of votes, which certainly I think proves that I have an electable agenda, I have the momentum, and the community likes the way I make decisions on their behalf. With that said, let's talk about establishment.
Sure. It's almost like a bad word.
It's a trigger word, and let's talk about that. I think we need our viewers to know that, and I think this is what's great about having the two of us together in a room. You a Republican, me a Democrat. Neither one of us are opponents. We're looking forward to being colleagues in Lansing. We're going to have to work hard on bipartisan issues to get things done.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to show our viewing audience how we can do that. And we should touch on some things that we certainly agree upon, but also that we know we'll talk about issues that we know we'll have debates on. We'll certainly have strong debate on things. But at the end of the day, folks, the votes come down, and it's how the legislature votes on your behalf as representatives. That's what Drew and I are looking forward to being for you, as a representative of the people. And what I want to do, Drew, is go to Lansing and represent the people all the way. Our opponent. Let's talk about our opponents in this race real quick, since you mentioned establishment.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'm definitely not the establishment choice for the seat. I think I've proven during my time on the school board and my time on the county commission that I'm not afraid to stand up to my colleagues.
Right.
I'm not afraid to be the only one standing alone on principle.
Absolutely.
Very recently with the veterans millage issue, I was the only vote against that.
You were
9
the lone
commissioners.
dissenter. Yes.
And in the weeks following, collected 500 signatures, helped mobilize local veterans organizations, and helped put a stop to my colleagues spending $50,000 of a veterans fund on a golf promotion. And I think it's things like that we can come together on. And at the end of the day, I believe in principles, not parties.
Right.
And I think we need to be able to serve our constituents and do what's right on a situational basis. And the establishment definitely has an issue with me, because I'm a free thinker and I do what I think is right, on the issues, and I don't always fall in line with what they want to do, and I think that scares them. And I know we have similar takes on a lot of things, and I've always said that I think argument is good, fighting is bad, and in the way that politics is recently, it's devolved into fighting.
Right.
I think the founders wanted us to have argument,
right,
to come to compromise,
right,
to do those things, and
right, because without debate, we can't know all the facts. We can't know all the variables that take into account, or the unforeseen potential consequences. Those are big perceptual things that need to be taken into consideration, and debate brings them to the forefront, and I think that's important.
Absolutely. Personally, I'd like the government to stay out of my pocket, stay out of my bedroom.
Yes.
And stay out of my stay out of my gun safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
just let me live my life.
And let me smoke marijuana in peace.
I would certainly support the will of the voters on that in November.
I'm so glad that you said that because I think that when the people speak and the voters decide, that's it. We should all respect the will of the voters, and at the end of the day, we all win because that's true democracy. That's a true representation of where the people are at, and I think once the voters speak, I believe that the legislative body should respect the will of the voters more so than they ever have before on this particular issue.
Sure,
Yeah.
I completely agree, and I think I find it very frustrating when we have these medical marijuana laws put into place and commercial medical marijuana laws put into place, and then the Republican Party or the Democratic Party and the powers that be basically say, well, okay, we'll pass that, but not in my backyard.
Right.
So they defer to local control when it's
Right.
convenient for them,
Right.
Because they don't want to be shouldered with a decision.
Right.
So you have reps out there who voted for these things in Lansing and then come home to their townships, cities, villages, whatever, and oppose it. And I just think that's unfortunate.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, let's touch on a quick subject real quick. The forfeiture law reform. One of the you mentioned that one of your successes as a county commissioner was standing up to your colleagues and on a vote of the veterans to spend veterans money on a golf tour. Whereas I'll give you an example of my career as township trustee. One of my years as trustee, I persuaded the board to vote against additional money being spent on the state police for drug enforcement in my township. And the reason I did that is because our county prosecutors was trying to sell the idea to us that it was based on meth lab cleanup. But when I asked my chief of police, how many meth labs have we ever cleaned up in the history of the township, the answer was 0. And so if there was an epidemic, certainly I would pay attention to it. Certainly I would address the issue. But when there's zero epidemic and someone's trying to sell my community something that we don't need, and we already had a police department, we're already paying for state police, we're already paying for county police, and we're already paying for our township police department. What do we need a fourth rogue police agency for that doesn't answer to anybody? Sure. And so I helped to cut that budget and remove it from the erosion of our budget. So that was significant. So I have stood up to my colleagues before. I stood up to them again on Monday by helping to put the vote of the police department to the vote of the people, which for years the people have had their taxes increased in my township, but they didn't have a chance to vote on it themselves. And for years my community would complain to us, we don't have a voice, we don't have an option. You're not letting the people speak, you're not letting the people be heard. So on Monday, I made the motion to put the police department to a vote of the people, and that was a huge success, and the township is very happy because of that. I do respect the will of the voters. However that decision comes down, I will honor it and will respect that.
Absolutely. You had mentioned civil asset forfeiture.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Interestingly, I think this is such a huge bipartisan issue with huge bipartisan support. I think it's very rare that you see the Mackinac Center for Public Policy on the right, even though they claim to be independent, working with the ACLU.
Right.
On fighting civil asset forfeiture.
Right.
And for me as a constitutional conservative, I'm opposed to any form of asset seizure that violates due process. And people want to talk about the Second Amendment and these types of things and not being able to have your Second Amendment rights if you're on a no-fly list, and the problem with that violating due process of the law. And I think civil asset forfeiture has been abused by a lot of law enforcement agencies, not all of them, but a lot of law enforcement agencies, and it's been used as a revenue generation tool to seize firearms, vehicles, homes, cash, and things of that nature without due process of the law. And opponents of this, and some of my opponents would probably twist this into me saying, well, what, you want us to leave their drugs there too? And no, absolutely not. But we can't be seizing people's assets and then be putting the burden back on them to then hire legal counsel, go to court, and fight to get their assets back when they were taken in the first place without due process. Right. So I think this is something we can really come together with on a bipartisan issue, and it completely violates the Constitution.
I'm so glad that you said it that way, Drew, because I agree 100% with you on that. It absolutely is a bipartisan issue. It's simply looking at it and evaluating the morality of the issue. You can't have a system that predicates law enforcement on people's to charge people's stuff with a crime. That's not even logical.
Right.
And so essentially, when you have bad laws like that, essentially, you erode the public's trust in law enforcement. You erode the public's trust in government and our leadership, because it's such a faulty law. And what it does is the way I describe this to people is that the forfeiture laws turn good police officers into acting like pirates, trying to seek revenue, and that doesn't go over well with the public. The public sees that behavior and they go, that's not justice, that's not right, and that's so unconstitutional. So absolutely, I think when we get down to Lansing, I think this is going to be a bipartisan issue that you and I are going to champion the cause for. We will get it done. I believe we will have a much better grip. I think when you and I get down to Lansing, I think that, because I feel confident about this race. I don't know about you,
Absolutely.
but I feel very confident about this race. And I believe that by this talk show and others, you and I can show the public that you and I have experience in being elected officials and representing our public well. You and I are the only candidates in each of our own races
With elected experience.
Our opponents have none. And I think that speaks hugely volumes for you and I.
Absolutely.
You have a record of standing up for the people and standing up against government and crooked politics. I have a reputation of that as well. We certainly are what the modern day people would call progressives or reformers. You and I are definitely those kind of people, I think.
Absolutely. I think, as I mentioned before, I do what's right on a situational basis, and
Right.
I try to represent the people to the best of my ability. And I think one of my biggest beefs with Lansing is so often we see legislation passed without proper input from the end stakeholder.
Oh, yeah.
They pass these laws because it looks good, they want to act and show that they're trying to do something.
Right.
But in the end, they don't really weigh out the consequences.
Right.
And I think that's a major issue I have with
Right.
them.
Too preoccupied with whether or not they could, never stop to think about whether or not they should.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think I'm with you on that one too. I have that exact same beef with Lansing as well. Another thing I have with Lansing, issue I have with Lansing, is when they take outside opinion, say from even foreigners, and when I say foreigners, I mean the Canadians came to our state and legislated our state legislators to pass laws on marijuana, giving them an edge in the medical marijuana community over advancement of the industry. I think that is wrong. I think that's wrong for our legislative body to entertain foreign entities and their lobbying efforts to decide on laws on how Americans should live. I think we should be more focused on what's important for Michigan, what's important for residents of Michigan in our country, in our state. I think that's what my main focus is, and I think that you and I represent that well, because I know where your politics and sides, where you are and things. I think that you and I are going to represent well. Let's talk about another issue that you and I agree on. That I certainly know that you mentioned earlier how you are not the establishment candidate. You're not favored by your Republican Party. And likewise, I'm not favored by the Democratic Party. And let's get into a few examples as to why. Number one, as a Democrat, and I've always felt that I've had, my whole life I've felt that I've always had a lot of views of the Democratic Party that I stood and valued. I think that a lot of my neighbors and friends in my community hold Democratic values as well, and I think that's very clear because the 48th district is clearly a Democratic district. Just like you running in the 51st district
Correct.
is a Republican valued district because it's a Republican seat.
Correct.
You and I are running on the parties that are most valued by the majority of the members in our community.
Absolutely.
And the way I look at this is I'm taking sort of the Ron Paul approach. I know that's sort of strange coming because I'm quoting a Republican, but at the same time, Ron Paul was a smart man. I was very respectable in his politics, and I think that he said it right when he said, you know what, join the party that's predominant in your area, and do your best to change the party from within. And I think that's what the whole basis of our Constitution and the founding forefathers had in mind. They knew, Thomas Jefferson said that laws would become like an old coat, that doesn't fit as you grow into a man, from a kid. And likewise, we as a society, we grow, we mature, things change, nuances come along, and we need new people to enter into politics, change out the old guard, and we need new, fresh ideas to come to the table. And I think we bring that. And I think you and I have proven that already by not only winning elections. So you and I have won 2 elections back to back.
Correct.
Yes. So that speaks high volumes for us as well. Also, so let's get into. We talked about constitutionalist. I like how you said that. You're a constitutionalist. I am also a constitutionalist. I stand up for the Second Amendment, and here's where I buck my party. Is I am a pro-Second Amendment candidate. I don't believe. I mean, look, I'm willing to entertain sensible policies on all things, including the Second Amendment gun policies. But they've got to be sensible. And from the rhetoric I hear in the news media and so forth, it's not sensible. Most of it is not sensible, and we could get into some specifics on that. But let's talk about the Second Amendment. What we believe the Second Amendment means. Let's talk about the importance and the value of it, and what's your position on it?
Absolutely. So I'm happy to have an A rating from the NRA.
Awesome.
And from the Michigan Gun Owners Association. And I've been a lifelong outdoorsman, shooter, used to shoot competitively. My grandpa started me shooting the .22 and BB gun when I was 4 years old. So I've been doing this my whole life, and I think one of the biggest things we need is to educate people about firearms.
Sure.
I think so often, as I mentioned about how Lansing does things, you have people who want to make laws about things they don't know about.
Yes.
And I
have a big problem with that.
And I think the same goes with firearms in the Second Amendment. Of you have people who are afraid of things because of their lack of knowledge.
Exactly.
And I think we need to educate the public on what a semi-automatic firearm actually is,
right?
Versus a full semi-automatic.
A full automatic, right?
Yeah,
right.
The joke being full semi-automatic.
Right.
No such thing.
There's no such thing. Right.
Correct.
I know it.
But I absolutely support the Second Amendment. I think it's a fundamental right. It's in the Constitution. It's guaranteed, and the purpose of it is not for hunting. It's to defend against tyranny. And
that's exactly it.
That's the way our founding fathers set it up, and I think that's the way it needs to stay.
I absolutely agree 100%. And even as a Democrat, I can tell you that as I'm out there knocking on doors, every third door I come to, the people say, wow, I'm so glad that you're a Democrat running on a pro-Second Amendment ticket, because they're like, I can't believe that there are. No one can convince me that the majority of the Democratic Party believes in banning guns. They don't.
Right.
I know that. I mean, and I think it's foolish for our news media to try to fool the American people, essentially, into believing this. I just don't. People don't believe in banning guns. I'll tell you one of the reasons I don't believe in banning guns is because anytime you ban something, anytime you create prohibition, in the words of Judge Joe Gray, you lose all regulation and control.
You create a black market. You empower the criminals.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, and the black market does nothing but breed more crime, more issues that need to be addressed. Whereas, don't ban something because but banning guns just simply does not make our community any safer. It doesn't make our schools safer. It doesn't, I would rather see, I think we talked about this before the show, how Clio High School in my district, I thought they did a superb job of addressing the school shooting issue, keeping the school safe. They have an emergency contingency plan put into effect. They have a little locking apparatus that goes on the door. It's a very inexpensive device that a teacher can instantly lock the door. It can't be opened from the outside. At the same time, they've put additional monies for resource officers on there. And you had mentioned to me before the show that as a county commissioner, you voted to approve
Absolutely.
Please go into that. Please explain.
Absolutely. So I was very happy to be a part of that process and approving our sheriff's office to hire a school resource officer for Clio. Lake Fenton in my district has recently taken similar action, and during my time on the Fenton School Board, we actually took action on improving the security in our buildings through building double door entrances where you need to be buzzed into the building. And we've looked at these things, and I think experience is so important in Lansing, and I think so many candidates could sit here and tell people what they want to hear.
Right.
But I think it's very important that you and I actually have experience, and I can tell people the things I'm going to do,
right,
and the things that are important to them, and not only give them the answers they want, but I can tell them and show them the things that you and I have done to actually take action on that.
Exactly.
And during my time on the school board in Fenton, we did take action to create those security vestibules and buzzer systems, and since I've left, I know they've taken more action along those same lines. But I think having an armed professional in these buildings is really important, and having a deterrent factor where it's not a gun-free zone. I think that is probably one of the most useless and
absolutely
counter active policies is a gun-free zone. It's basically saying no one here has the ability to defend themselves.
Right.
So
right.
I think having trained professionals in those situations is important. I'm not really a big proponent of arming teachers.
Right.
I do have former teachers of mine who were also DNR officers in the summer and sworn law enforcement officers to help supplement their income, and I think perhaps in those situations there might be an exception that could be made, but I think the real solution is having some armed professional personnel in those buildings. And is it a perfect answer? No, but we don't live in a perfect world.
No, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself, Drew. And I absolutely I applaud the Clio Area School District, the Clio Area School Board. I applaud
Absolutely.
you and your efforts of what you guys did in conjunction with law enforcement, finding resources, putting these issues on the table and getting things done.
Mm-hmm.
I applaud all of you with that. That is the way to do things. I believe I believe this whole issue could be resolved with common sense approach by people, candidates, and elected officials like you and I. That's why and that's why I had you on the show, Drew, is because this is really the first opportunity I've really had to sit down in front of a live audience and discuss not only partisan issues, because I could have easily have chosen a Democrat to sit down with me,
Sure.
and we could go over this. But that's almost like a self-referring loop in a sense. It'd be like two Republicans or two Democrats.
Right.
You're going to get the same thing. But here's an opportunity for our audience to look at a conservative Republican in a sense, or what did you call yourself, a constitutional
conservative.
Yes, constitutional conservative. I like that. And I would say I'm more of a constitutional liberal.
Sure.
in a sense, because I believe there's many views, especially on drug former policy, that I have more liberal views on than I'm sure you do. But but I still have views that I think are more common sense in line with the average voter.
Thank you. Absolutely agree.
Yeah, and I constantly go to people, I constantly run into people who tell me that they voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary election and they voted for Donald Trump in the general election. And I think those are the kind of people that are gonna look at you and I, because they're an independent thinker, they're an independent voter. Sometimes they vote Republican, sometimes they vote Democrat. But they mostly look at the candidate,
Sure.
the integrity of the candidate. Mm-hmm. And I think you and I have all the integrity in the world for the viewing audience to look at. Look at our platform, look at our agendas that we want to accomplish, and look at how Drew and I, as future colleagues in Lansing working for you, we can actually get things done. I mean, there are things, yes, I have no doubt. Mm-hmm. We're going to run into things where you and I are going to get headstrong. Absolutely. And we're going to debate, and we're going to debate, and we're going to debate, and we're going to have a good challenge and a good fun doing it.
Well, that's okay. That's how it's supposed to be.
That's how it's supposed to be. And at the end of the day, I can shake your hand,
yep.
and we can agree to disagree or whatever. And however the votes come down, if our colleagues, I would love it. I would love it to see where you and I are championing a cause or an issue on either side,
yep.
and we are trying to get our colleagues. I'm trying to sway your Republican colleagues to see things my way.
Absolutely.
And you're trying to sway my Democratic colleagues to see things your way.
Absolutely.
And I think at the end of the day, Drew, when we have good exchange and good debate like that, the American people and the people in the people of the great state of Michigan are going to win.
Absolutely. And I agree. I think people want effective government without the social drama.
Yes.
And I think that's something that you and I can provide.
Absolutely.
Because we can sit down as professionals.
Yes.
We can disagree respectfully, but still have some mutual respect for one another.
And I think that a lot of our connections that we agree on are going to be rooted in the fact that you and I are both constitutionalists at heart.
Absolutely.
You and every decision I've seen you make at the county commission level, and I've been watching your career as it's progressed. I think you've been kind of paying attention to mine.
Amen.
Mine's definitely been a little more controversial in the news media lately.
Absolutely.
and if you don't know, I mean, my township is under a lot of media scrutiny. There will be a 3:00 media frenzy today at my township over much debate that's going on. So tune into TV 25, TV 12. They will be covering my township board meeting today at 3:00. I just want everyone to know. Yes, with that, I mean, we are going to have a lot of opportunity to really speak up on the behalf of the residents of Michigan after we get elected. And I am looking really forward to that, Drew. And I want to show everybody that in your race, in the primary, because in the primary, so that the listening audience knows, for those of you that don't know, the primary election, you cannot split your ticket.
Correct.
So you've got to go into the primary voting either as a Republican only, or as or only on the Democratic ticket, one or the other. So in this particular situation, if you live in the 51st district,
correct,
and that's southern Genesee County, or if you live in the 48th, which is my district, which is northern Genesee County, you will only be able to vote for me if you live where I do, and you'll only be able to vote for Drew, okay, if you live where he lives. So what you have limited options right there. And then you have to decide between those party-aligned candidates. In your race, you said you had 3 opponents?
I do. I have 3 Republican opponents in the primary.
Okay, you don't have to give their names. We ain't got to give them credit. I don't give my opponents names.
I think some of them have really drawn a lot of attention to themselves recently through a lot of negative smear campaign tactics they've tried to use to lower the bar in our race.
Really?
Certainly I've made mistakes when I was younger, as a lot of us do.
Sure.
But I've spent the last 10 years of my life serving this community through scholarship programs I sponsor and host, to helping animals, serving as a 5th grade mentor in the schools, various boards and commissions. And I think it's really unfortunate when you have that type of campaign tactic implemented and to try and distract from one's own lack of qualification. And I think people are really tired of seeing that.
Absolutely. And I would rather see personal attacks about stuff in people's past or whatever. I would like to see those things done away with and focus more on what this candidate is really about.
Right, tell me what you're going to do.
Exactly. And what are the core principles that you believe in?
Right.
Because I think, a lot of people, when they ask me, I will get the Second Amendment question thrown at me at random at people's doors. When I'm knocking on doors, I've had people just flat out, within the first 3 seconds of meeting me, they will ask me, what's your position on the Second Amendment? Mm-hmm. And I will tell them I'm pro Second Amendment. I don't believe in banning guns.
Yep.
And I'm running as a Democrat. And I believe in respecting the will of the people. And I'm sorry, but the Constitution is very clear that the Second Amendment says shall not be infringed. Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty cut and clear to me.
Absolutely. And I think you have a lot of candidates who like to pander to people and give different answers
Yes.
to different audiences. And I've known you for a while now, and I know that's not your style.
No, definitely not. I'll tell you straight up how it is.
Exactly.
whether you like it or not.
And it certainly isn't my style either. And
Right.
that's why I like these kind of formats where we can have a conversation
Yes.
where there's nothing really scripted, and what you see is what you get.
Exactly.
Like I said, principles, not parties.
And that's another reason I think, and this is why I support you for the 51st District of Genesee County's House Reps, even though you're a Republican, because I know that I'm going to be able to get down there in Lansing, and I'm going to be able to work with you.
Absolutely.
You're not one of these. You're not one of these. Corporate Republicans that just says, I've already made up my mind, don't want to hear it, buddy, get lost.
Right.
I know you're not like that. And you're also intuitive to what the people's concerns and wishes are. I mean, I can see it when you're in your voting decision. You stand up for the majority of the people. If the will of the voters wants you, you'll stand up for it. And I'm so thankful that you said that you would respect the will of the voters if the voters go to the voting polls this November and vote to legalize marijuana, because that's going to be a big one. And I think that when we get to Lansing, criminal justice system reform, as we've already talked about in a couple of areas, is going to be a major thing for this next election. I think it really is. We're going to have to address some issues.
If we can't respect the will of the voters and what people want as a representative of them, what are we doing?
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
I can't see how that would be doing my job.
Exactly.
I think I have a duty to respect what the people want and uphold the decisions they make, and that's why I'm in favor of seeing a lot of these things on the ballot to a direct vote by the people, and,
Right.
and not taken on by the legislature when
Exactly.
you have issues like this. And I would absolutely support the will of the voters. I recently asked our prosecuting attorney in Genesee County in a open board meeting, what our plan was and what our staffing needs might look like if we weren't prosecuting some of these nonviolent drug offenses.
Right.
And he didn't have the greatest answer for me off the top of his head, but
Sure.
granted, I caught him a little off guard.
Sure.
But I think there's definitely some reforms that could and should take place if the will of the voters is to make that change in November.
Absolutely. And I too have also had a conversation with our county prosecutor, David Layton. I had a sit down with him, had a great discussion. We talked about the future of this, where it's going to go. And legislatively, everyone knows that it's on my platform that if the voters vote to legalize this in November, I will move to pass legislation or even put forth legislation to release everyone from jail and expunge everyone's record. And that's if the Attorney General and the Governor won't do it first. I mean, if the Governor wants to act on it, or if the Attorney General wants to make a move on it, or puts pressure on the legislature to act, that's fine. I'm all for it. But I think that morally speaking, if the voters decide to legalize marijuana for every adult 21 and older, like alcohol, then we should respect the will of voters. We should let those people out of jail and expunge their record.
Certainly. I think my one main concern, and I hear this from people, is how do we make sure, if it does pass, that we have an ability to detect impaired drivers? And I think you might be a little more knowledgeable on this, or I'm certain you are.
Okay.
How is that something that we can counteract? Because certainly we don't want people to be impaired behind the wheel, but at the same time, you don't want people to get pulled over and arrested for smoking or using cannabis legally weeks prior.
Yeah.
And it's still in their system. So how do we find...
or just simply transporting it like you would alcohol.
Sure.
So like
in the scenario it does pass, how do we counteract that?
Well, I think for one, let's first examine the science of impairment. So what does a level of impairment really mean? Let's say take caffeine, for example. Caffeine is a drug. A drug is, by its very definition, is any substance or chemical that produces a noticeable change in the body or mind. Therefore, there are varying degrees of what creates a level of impairment. So, for example, in a medical marijuana case, prescription drugs, for example, have it on the bottle. Do not use this prescription medication while operating motorized vehicle if you feel a level of impairment, or do not operate on this medication, a motorized vehicle, until you know a tolerance level or a level of impairment. Many prescription bottles have that warning label on the side of the bottle.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that you can't take the prescription and drive a car. It just means that you should be familiar with the prescription, have taken it several times, and understand the effects of it before you drive.
Sure.
So that you're cautious and using good judgment, so that you're not driving while impaired. I think this is going to go the same way for marijuana that it does for alcohol. For example, I was having a conversation with a different county prosecutor about the same exact subject, and we were at a restaurant having a beer, and I said to the prosecutor, I said, looked over at the person having a tall beer with next to his 11-year-old daughter. And he had 2 of those, and he got up and walked out of the restaurant. And this is a restaurant, we're eating food. And of course they had dinner, him and his daughter had dinner. Sure. And his daughter's like 11 years old, but he walks out, gets in his vehicle, and drives away. And I looked right at my prosecutor, who I'm having a beer with at the table, and I said, now, didn't we just recognize a man get up and from a bar, having a few drinks, and he gets his car and drives his daughter home. But nobody around him would think that that's a wrong thing to do. And that's because we rely on the adult to have good judgment to not be impaired. I would think that given the size of the individual, the number of beers that he drank, and given the amount of food that he ate, he probably was not impaired or did not feel impaired when leaving the restaurant.
Sure.
Therefore, we can trust that adult is making a good decision. And people that are impaired, clearly, when they are driving, we punish those people. We already have laws in the books. We have OWI, DUI. We have all these different laws in the books right now, which still govern and police and give police the tools they need to police someone from driving impaired if they are.
Absolutely.
And so I think those laws already exist, and we should just simply enforce them and make sure that people aren't driving impaired. If someone's driving impaired, fine. Look, they need to be punished. That's just the fact of the matter.
Certainly.
But I also have issues with our alcohol legal limit too, because I often question whether that's sort of an arbitrary number. Picked out of the air or simply dwindled down over the years. I kind of think that just because you might blow over a 0.08 or something like that, you may not necessarily be or have a level of impairment. And I think that would be varying per adult. So I think it's sort of a gray area, but we'll have to handle that as time goes on. And
the gray area was exactly what came to mind.
Yeah, gray area, it is. Yeah. Because it's touchy, I think. Yeah. We got about 5 minutes left before we got to cut it off. Is there anything on your mind that you want to say, that you want people to know about your candidacy, your position, anything about our opponents? One thing I want to say about my opponents is that my one major opponent is what I would call the establishment candidate.
Sure.
And I would want the viewing audience to know that I'm not the establishment candidate. I am here to represent the people, and if that means going against the party for the sake of the will of the people, if that means I've got to argue, debate, bump my colleagues, call them out on their shenanigans, as I have done before, clearly in the past. I think everyone knows that I am definitely the trustee that will call people out when they're not doing things. In fact, I had an issue 3 or 4 years ago where I had to sue my township, 5 police officers and a building inspector, and it was a horrible situation that I was in. They really confiscated my property for not really using the forfeiture laws, but they did a backdoor deal on me where they used the International Building Code to take my building. That was an extreme case. I took that case all the way to the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, where I inevitably lost. But the testimony that I gained from that experience was completely invaluable, and the fact is, the testimony revealed that building inspector had lied, to acquire an illegal warrant. And I'm sorry, but as a trustee of the township, looking out for the residents of my community, I absolutely cannot tolerate an employee lying, first of all, and then not only lying to a judge to acquire an illegal warrant, but also lying furthermore to cover it all up and to save face of other people.
Absolutely.
And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, that individual building inspector did leave the township. He quit. He quit the township on his own accord. Mm-hmm. But had he not quit, I would have hammered that issue down until he was fired in the most humiliating way. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that I stood up for the residents of my township against a pre-crime mentality that grants unfettered power and authority for one individual to violate the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution.
I was going to say the Fourth Amendment definitely comes to mind.
All because of the International Building Code and the reluctance of that International Building Code to hold constitutional muster under the right of entry clause. Mm-hmm. And when we get to Lansing, this may very well be one of the issues that I bring up and bring to the forefront of debate, because I really do feel that the state of Michigan owes it to the people of Michigan to rephrase the right of entry clause mm-hmm. on the International Building Code, because I am absolutely convinced that that international building law is being used to subvert the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution of the residents of Michigan. And I believe that it can be highly abused by local municipalities. Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to address that at a state level so that it's very clear that we're there. Let's try to wrap it up quick.
Absolutely. So, just lastly, I'd like to say thanks for inviting me to be here today. I think if either of us were the establishment candidates, we probably wouldn't be sitting in a room together with 12 days left in the election here. And
that is true.
I'd just like to remind people of the importance of the August 7th primary in both of our districts. The primary elections, on your hand, the Democratic side, on mine, the Republican side, those primaries are more important often than the general election.
Absolutely.
Because whoever wins this primary is likely to go on to win in November.
Yep.
I certainly hope we have a chance to work together in Lansing. I've fought for veterans and taxpayers on the county commission. I'd like to continue to do so in Lansing, and I will always stand up for what I believe is right on a situational basis. I try to pride myself on being accessible to my constituents, so please feel free to check out my Facebook page, Genesee County Commissioner Drew Shapiro, or my website, shapiroformi.com. Happy to get back to each and every one of you, and thanks for listening today. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to wrap up too, and just know I agree with everything that Mr. Shapiro just said. Commissioner Shapiro, and you can call me Trustee Gunnels.
Trustee.
I'm very excited and very glad that we did this today, Drew. I think that it is very important that we show our community that you and I are progressive candidates. We have the young at heart youth and energy of youth on our side to get things done. We have proven ourselves as candidates. We have proven ourselves in both of us have been elected back to back to elected positions. And we are the only candidates in our own race who have elected experience at all. So we are the people's candidates, the people's choice. And I want to echo what my colleague said. I do look forward to working in Lansing with Drew and the Republican Party as a Democrat, and seeing how we can bring bipartisan issues to the forefront for the sake of Michigan residents. I'm also looking to fixing the Flint water crisis. There are many other issues, environmental issues, all kinds of issues I think that we need to talk about. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to encourage everyone to get out and vote on August 7th, the primary. Absolutely. It is exactly like Drew said. Oftentimes, the primary elections in Michigan are far more important than the general elections because, like he said, whoever wins the primaries are likely to go on to be the winners in the fall, in the general election. And with that, you can go to our websites. I believe our donate, I believe, is on the bottom of the screen to each of us below our names and faces here on the screen. You can donate to our campaigns. Go to our websites. Investigate us more, learn more about the things that Drew has done as a candidate, learn more about the things that I have done as a candidate. Listen, we thank you very much. Drew, it's been a great honor and a great pleasure.
You too.
Yes, and good luck in the election.
Same to you, my friend.
Yes.